Then it's very wooded, and then it's kind of a scary neighborhood. And I'm like, I may not have thought this all the way through.
Welcome to 10-Minute Travels. With me as always is Phil Freeman.
And with me as always is Shane Patrick. And today we're going to talk to Willie Costello, train conductor.
Let's get right to it, shall we? Will has all sorts of interesting experiences, like a lot of people in this part of the world. Studied animation in college for a bit, and bartended in New Orleans.
Yes.
And currently paints for money and vocation in Alaska. What church are you a reverend in?
World Christianship Ministries, which I actually, anyone can do this. I got my reverendship out of the back of the Weekly World News, which...
Rest in peace.
Yeah, I know. Very sad that that's gone.
Bat Boy's still around, though.
He is. Bat Boy will always be with us. And the 500-pound cat and Sasquatch and the aliens. But, I was working someplace overnight. And, I'm just in the classified... Remember classifieds?
Barely.
In the classified section of the Weekly World News, it's like, do you want to become a reverend? I was like, absolutely. Please go on. So I sent my self-addressed stamped envelope. They sent me the information, and for $40, I sent $40. Kind of, I was like, this is something in the classifieds of the Weekly World News. But then 2 weeks later, I had a couple certificates and a card, which I don't have in my wallet. I'd show you my card. And
when we edit this later, we'll say that you showed us the card, and we'll ooh and ah.
Okay.
Because it's a podcast. No one can tell.
Yeah. And the funny thing is when so I had it probably for a year, and then a friend of mine asked me to marry, or my friends asked me to marry them. I was like, this might just be ornamental. I was still living in Maryland at the time, but I went to the courthouse and, Bureau of Licenses or whatever, and I showed it to them, and they're like, and it was really great because the lady was not happy about it. She definitely seemed to think that weddings should be held in churches by people that have professed their whole life to whatever religion they prescribe to. But they had a roster, and it was in there. So, because Maryland's not like Alaska. You can't, have you can't have just anyone perform your wedding.
Yeah, Alaska state law from back in the days when it was so remote, a person can perform one marriage per day. Anybody in Alaska.
Per day or year?
Per day.
Is it per day?
Yeah, because when I worked in Juneau, there was a guy who he went on helicopter tours with us 3 or 5 times a week, performing ceremonies on the glacier. That was his gig.
All right, I didn't. But even at that, in Alaska, I guess if it came down to performing more than one a day, I could, because whatever this weird...
Yeah, you got the ominous dominus.
I do, yeah, I'm in. So I performed weddings in Maryland, a couple in Alaska, and then when I worked in Florida, I worked on a pirate theme ship, Captain Nemo's pirate cruise. So I was a pirate in Florida, and somehow it came up in conversation, and they're like, because I guess they have to go so far out for the captain to do it, but then the captain's kind of busy. Like, you can perform weddings? I was like, yeah. And we don't have to go to this set distance. I was like, yeah, I'll check. And Florida observed it too. So...
Right, because that's maritime law or something.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, a captain can perform a wedding at sea, but you have to be so far to be at sea. So we could do it right in the Clearwater Channel. And yeah, so in a cheesy pirate costume, I performed a lot of weddings too.
Did you throw a lot of R's and mateys into that particular?
It kind of depended on where the people wanted to go with it, but there were some that I was kind of embarrassed to do. And I have no idea what my record for people that I know. I'm still batting 500. So
That puts you in the All-Star game.
yep.
That are still married.
Yeah.
So this is how Willie became a reverend, but for 10-minute travels, we thought we'd bring him in to talk about a chapter of his life that revolved around trains. And there's a lot of cool stuff. We even started out just talking about it earlier. But if you could, Willie, just kind of a short digestion about kind of what brought you to trains. You could go past that and say how you got to here to Alaska, but let's go back to trains.
All right.
But give us a little bit of a synopsis.
So a synopsis around the story. So growing up in Woodbine, Maryland, rural area of Maryland, train ran right through the middle of town. And so we would ride our bikes, like hanging out the railroad bridge was what we did when we were kids. Like littler kids, not like teenagers. And go run around and play in the woods. And when the train would come through, which fast forward, I ended up working in the railroad for the railroad later. It's like it must have been going in and out of an industry or something because it was very slow and it would just go like 5 miles an hour forward, 5 miles an hour back. So we would jump on the train. That was like part of the game. Probably still very dangerous, but we're like
Not for 10-year-old boys.
right. We were like 10, so we would jump on the train. Then fast forward 11 years, and we were at a bar. I was working as a cook at the time. This comes into the story. And we all went out to this bar in like an industrial area in Baltimore. And I'm in the car and we're waiting for the train to go by. And all of a sudden I'm like, let me out. And everyone's kind of like, you have to pee? Are you sick? I was like, just let me out. And they let me out. And I'm still in my checkered pants and my chef's uniform. And I just jumped on the train and went.
Where'd you go?
I ended up, it was a coal train. And so I ended up at like the coal, like where they would ship the coal, like unload it and ship it to China, I would imagine. And so I'm on the train and it was great. I'm having a great time. And then all of a sudden I'm not where I know in Baltimore anymore. And then it's very wooded. And then it's kind of a scary neighborhood. And I'm like, I may not have thought this all the way through. And so finally the train stops and I'm at, this big facility that like takes the coal and puts it in containers and puts it on ships. And it's, I don't know, 5 a.m, like the sun's just coming up. I'm no longer drunk, which it should be. I was very drunk when I got on the train.
That was implied.
Yeah. I'm in a chef's uniform covered in coal dust from head to toe. And so I wander into the warehouse because this is way before cell phones. And I walk in and I'm like, do you have a payphone? They're like, it's over there. And like, I'm at shift change. So there are guys walking in and out just looking at this soot-covered cook. I was not a chef. And so I get over to the payphone and then I have to go back to the guy at the front. I'm like, can I have 4 quarters for $1? So I go back over. The phone book under the payphone is still intact. So I open it up and my first call is I call a taxi. Again, I'm on the phone. I go back to this guy. He's like somewhere between bewildered and like annoyed. And I'm like, where am I? It's like, I need a taxi to pick me up. So he gives me the address. Again, it's like, where I am in Baltimore, I don't know. I don't know where I am. but I have a taxi coming to get me and I know where I'm going, which isn't home right away because I also realized, like, after the second phone call, I have 50 cents. So I call my buddy who lived like within walking distance of my house. And, you know, it's 6. He's getting up for work. I knew he got up early. I was like, I'm going to come to your house in a little bit. Can I borrow like probably $40 or $50? And then I have a great story to tell you why. He's like, well, yes, you can. I'm expecting a great story. I got to go. But these are my friends I married, actually. But Caroline, my wife, will be there. Like, okay. So I get in the cab. We're driving. And I can see he's looking at me, but I'm really, like, I'm just exhausted at this point. He really seemed very unsurprised. Like, I guess if you drive a cab in Baltimore, you see lots of stuff.
Probably on that shift too.
Mm-hmm. So it's like 6 a.m. So he drives me to my friend's house. I go over, I knock on the door. My friend Caroline answers the door. I cleaned up a little bit in the bathroom at the warehouse, but I'm still pretty dirty. And she has the money and she's like, oh, I'm waiting for this story. I was like, yep.
That was Willie Costello, train conductor. If you want to learn more about Willie or listen to more 10-minute travels, you can check out 10minutetravels.com.
And we definitely want to remind you to make sure that your sense of humor matches your sense of adventure.